She was just a translator hired to deliver peace terms. But when she called the Vampire King's laws cruel in front of everyone, they said she'd signed her death warrant. What no one expected, he spared her life, kept her close, and now his entire court is wondering why he won't let her go. The Grand Council Hall smelled like old stone and fresh fear. Mira pressed her sweating palms against her thighs, trying to steady her breathing. Around her, 12 human envoys sat rigid in their chairs, faces pale as candle wax. Across the massive chamber, separated by 50 feet of polished black marble, the vampire court watched them with the patient hunger of cats observing trapped mice. She shouldn't be here. She was just a translator, a nobody from the border villages who happened to speak both the human common tongue and the ancient vampire language. 3 days ago, soldiers had pulled her from her small room above the bookshop and told her the king required her services. Nobody refused the Vampire King. Translator, the voice cut through the silence, like a blade through silk. Myra's head snapped up. King Valerius sat on his throne of carved obsidian, looking exactly like the monster from children's stories, except worse, because he was real. Tall and unnervingly still, with black hair that fell past his shoulders and eyes the color of dried blood. He wore dark armor even here, in his own hall, as if he expected war at any moment. "Yes, Your Majesty?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Tell the human delegation what I have decided." The way he said decided, not propose or offer, sent ice down her spine. Valerius stood, and every vampire in the room straightened. He moved to the center of the floor, between the two groups, his boots clicking against marble with terrible precision. "The northern human territories will submit to nightly patrols." He began in the vampire tongue, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "Every household will provide 1 pint of blood monthly as tribute. Humans found traveling after sunset without vampire escort will be executed. No trails. No exceptions." Myra's stomach dropped. She glanced at the human envoys, Lord Ashford, Lady Chun, Captain Brennan, and 9 others whose names she'd barely learned. They waited, uncomprehending, trusting her to relay the terms that would govern their people's lives. Or deaths. Translator, Valerius turned those red eyes on her. "Proceed." The smart thing, the survival thing, was to translate exactly as told. Mira had seen what happened to humans who displeased vampires. She'd found her neighbor drained behind the mill last spring, left like discarded trash. Her mouth opened. The words should have come automatically. They didn't. "The king says," she faltered, switching to the common tongue. Lord Ashford leaned forward. "He says that the northern territories will be forced to give blood every month, and that anyone outside after dark without a vampire guard will be killed immediately." Lord Ashford's weathered face went gray. We can't possibly." "I'm not finished," Mira continued, her voice dropping. "He's also demanding patrols through our streets every night. Soldiers in our homes. She stopped. The words sat on her tongue like poison. "Don't say it. Don't be stupid. Translate and survive." "It's cruel," Mira said quietly. "These laws are cruel." The hall's temperature seemed to plummet 20 degrees. Every vampire went utterly still, that predator stillness that meant something had caught their attention. The human envoys stared at her in horror. Lord Ashford made a strangled sound that might have been her name. Mira kept going, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "These terms will spark rebellion. People are already starving in the northern territories. You take their blood, their freedom, their safety, what's left worth living for. They'll fight. And when they do, more will die on both sides then." "Enough." Valerius hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The single word hit like a physical blow. He moved toward her with inhuman speed, crossing 20 feet in a heartbeat. Suddenly, he was there, towering over her, close enough that she could see flecks of darker red in his eyes. Close enough to kill her without even trying. "You dare," he said softly, "to call your king cruel?" Myra's survival instinct screamed at her to apologize, to grovel, to beg. Her knees shook so badly, she had to lock them to stay upright. But something reckless and furious had woken up inside her chest, something that remembered her neighbor's body, her sister's hungry children, the way her people flinched at shadows now. "I translated what you said," she whispered. "Then I spoke the truth. If that offends you, I can't help it." Silence. The kind of silence that precedes executions. A vampire courtier with silver rings through his ears laughed, a cold, delighted sound. She just confessed to treason. In front of everyone. Is she simple? She's dead, another murmured. She just doesn't know it yet. Valerius stared at Mira for what felt like an eternity. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he was angry or amused or something else entirely. His face might as well have been carved from the same stone as his throne. Then he moved. Mira flinched, expecting claws or fangs. But Valerius simply turned away, walking back toward his throne with measured steps. "Take the translator to the dungeons," he said calmly. "Let her contemplate the cost of honesty." "Your Majesty." Lord Ashford stood, voice cracking. "She was just doing her job, she didn't mean." "The dungeons," Valerius repeated.
"Now."
2 vampire guards appeared at Myra's sides. Their hands on her arms felt like iron bands. As they dragged her toward the massive doors, she caught glimpses of faces, human envoys looking away in shame and relief that it wasn't them, vampire nobles smirking at the entertainment. Only one person wasn't watching her go. Valerius had returned to his throne, but he wasn't looking at the human delegation or his court. He sat perfectly still, staring at nothing, one hand curled into a fist on the armrest. For just a moment he looked almost troubled. Then the doors slammed shut, and Mira was hauled down into the darkness beneath the fortress, where disobedient humans went to learn their final lesson. Everyone said the Vampire King showed no mercy. Everyone said speaking against him meant death. As the dungeon's cold wrapped around her, Mira wondered why he hadn't killed her immediately. She'd given him every reason. She'd humiliated him in front of both courts. The guards threw her into a cell and locked the door. Alone in the dark, Mira realized something that terrified her more than the thought of execution. Valerius had looked at her like she'd said something he'd been waiting centuries to hear. The dungeon cell had 3 things: a stone bench, a bucket, and darkness so thick Mira could taste it. She'd been sitting there for 4 hours, or maybe 6, or maybe 20. Time moved strangely when the only sound was your own breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere in the black. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. That scared her more than the trembling had. It meant her body was accepting this as reality. A cell. No trial. No way out. Above her, footsteps echoed, dozens of them, moving through the fortress corridors. Court business continuing as if she'd never existed. The human delegation was probably being escorted back to their territories right now, grateful to have escaped with their lives. Without a translator, they'd have to accept whatever terms Valerius sent in writing. She'd changed nothing, accomplished nothing, died for nothing. The cell door screeched open. Mira scrambled to her feet, blinking against the sudden torchlight. 2 guards stood in the doorway, but they weren't alone. Between them stood a vampire woman in dark robes, her silver hair pulled into an intricate braid. She looked at Mira the way someone might examine a strange insect. "I am Magistrate Kale," the woman said in perfect common tongue. "I've come to deliver the king's judgment." Here it was then. The execution order. Mira lifted her chin, determined not to cry. "I'm ready." Magistrate Kale's eyebrows rose. "Ready for what?"
2D.
That's what happens to humans who offend the king, isn't it? Something flickered across the magistrate's face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. She unrolled a scroll, the parchment crackling in the silence. "The king has declared that the translator Mira of Ashbourne Village is guilty of insubordination and speaking out of turn during official council proceedings." Kale's voice was formal, practiced. "The sentence is indefinite imprisonment until such time as the king determines appropriate punishment." Mira stared. What? You heard correctly. But Myra's thoughts tumbled over each other. He's not executing me? Apparently not. Kale rolled the scroll back up, and now there was definite confusion in her expression. You'll remain here. Food twice daily. Water as needed. No visitors without royal permission. She turned to leave, then paused. When she looked back, something almost like concern crossed her features. Girl, do you understand how strange this is? Mira shook her head mutely. King Valerius once executed a nobleman for arriving 3 minutes late to court. He beheaded a general who questioned a battle strategy, and the general was right. Kale stepped closer, lowering her voice. Last year, a human servant spilled wine on his armor. The king didn't even blink. Just snapped the boy's neck and continued his conversation. Cold spread through Myra's chest. Then why? That's what everyone's asking. Kale studied her with unsettling intensity. What did you say to him? After the council, the guards reported you two spoke. We didn't. He just ordered me imprisoned. You said nothing else? Did nothing unusual? Mira thought back to those final moments. Valerius on his throne, that strange, troubled expression. No. Nothing. Kale looked like she wanted to push further, but footsteps echoed in the corridor. She stepped back quickly, her face smoothing into formal blankness. The king's judgment stands. Someone will bring food shortly. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed everything again. But Myra's mind was racing now. Indefinite imprisonment. Until he determines appropriate punishment. That wasn't mercy. That was worse than a quick execution. It was torture drawn out, day after day, never knowing when death would finally come. It was meant to break her slowly. Except, why bother? Why not just kill her and be done with it? The magistrate's words echoed. Do you understand how strange this is? Footsteps again, lighter this time. The door opened to reveal a young vampire guard with a tray of bread and water. He set it on the floor without meeting her eyes. Wait, Mira called as he turned to go. What's everyone saying? In the court, about me. The guard hesitated. He shouldn't answer. She could see the conflict on his face. But maybe he was young enough to still have curiosity. They're saying the king's gone soft, he whispered. That the human girl bewitched him somehow. Lady Sareth called for your immediate execution in tonight's council session. Myra's stomach dropped. And the king told her to leave the room. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't explain. Just told her to go. The guard glanced nervously down the corridor. That's not like him. King Valerius doesn't show mercy. He doesn't hesitate. But you're alive, and no one understands why. He fled before she could ask anything else. Mira sank onto the stone bench, bread forgotten. She was alive. Imprisoned, yes, but breathing. Thinking. Still capable of causing trouble, apparently just by existing. The vampire king had every reason to kill her. Instead, he'd made her survival a mystery that his entire court was trying to solve. In the darkness, Mira smiled grimly. If she was going to be trapped here, slowly going mad, she might as well figure out the answer herself. Why had Valerius looked troubled instead of angry? What had she said that made him hesitate? And most importantly, what was a king who ruled through fear afraid of? Mira woke to the sound of her cell door opening. For a moment, she thought she'd dreamed it. The guards had brought evening meal hours ago, or what she assumed was evening. Time in the dungeon was just guesswork and hunger pangs. Then she heard breathing that wasn't her own. She sat up fast, pressing her back against the cold stone wall. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by torchlight from the corridor. Tall. Still. Wrong. Who's there? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The figure stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind him. In the sudden darkness, 2 red eyes gleamed like dying embers. Myra's heart stopped, then kicked into a gallop. She knew those eyes. Everyone in the kingdom knew those eyes. Your Majesty. She tried to stand, but her legs betrayed her. She stayed frozen against the wall instead. King Valerius said nothing. He moved deeper into the cell with that supernatural grace, his boots silent on stone. He stopped 5 feet away, close enough that she could make out his silhouette, far enough that she couldn't read his expression. The silence stretched like a blade being slowly drawn. "Why did you speak?" His voice was quiet, almost conversational. Somehow that was worse than anger. Myra's mouth went dry. I was translating." "You translated. Then you editorialized." He tilted his head slightly.
"Why?"
"Because it was true." "Truth," he said the word like it was foreign to him. "You risked execution for truth." "I risked it for my people." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Those laws would have destroyed them. Someone had to say it. Someone. Valerius moved closer, 3 feet now. "But why you? You're not a leader. Not a warrior. You're a translator. Nobodies don't throw their lives away." There was something in his tone, not mockery, but genuine confusion. As if her choice made no sense to him. Mira forced herself to meet those red eyes. "Maybe that's why I had to speak. The envoys, they have to think politically. They have families, responsibilities. They can't afford to be honest. And you can?" "I have nothing to lose." The laugh that escaped her was bitter. "I'm an orphan from a border village. No title. No family left. If I die, 3 people might notice. So yes, Your Majesty, I could afford honesty." Valerius went very still. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant drip of water somewhere in the dungeon's depths. "You think you have nothing to lose," he said finally. "That's why you weren't afraid." "I was terrified," Mira corrected. "I still am. But fear was already ruling us." Silence wouldn't save anyone. Another long pause. Then, unexpectedly, "Tell me about the Northern Territories." Mira blinked. "What?" "You said my laws would cause rebellion." "Explain." This felt like a trap. Like he was gathering evidence for a longer list of charges. But what did it matter now? She was already imprisoned, already condemned to whatever fate he'd eventually choose. "The northern villages are starving," she said quietly. "Your war with the eastern clans cut off trade routes 3 years ago. We used to get grain shipments, medicine. Now we get nothing except demands, more taxes, more tributes, more restrictions. There are emergency supplies, which your governors hoard or sell to wealthy families." Myra's voice hardened. "I watched children die last winter because their parents couldn't afford medicine that sat in your warehouses. And now you want to take blood too? Monthly? From people who barely have enough strength to work their fields. They would be compensated. With what? More promises?" She was standing now, anger overriding fear. "You don't see us, Your Majesty. To you we're just resources, numbers in reports. But we're people. We're dying. And your new laws would just speed up the process." The words hung in the darkness between them. Mira waited for the blow, the rage, the punishment she'd surely earned. Instead, Valerius turned away, moving to the small barred window high in the cell wall. Moonlight filtered through, painting silver lines across his profile. "My generals assured me the territories were stable," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "Your generals lie." His head snapped toward her. "Careful. You asked me to explain." "I'm explaining." Myra's hands were shaking again, but she didn't stop. "They tell you what you want to hear because telling you the truth means ending up in cells like this. Or worse." Valerius stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're either very brave or very stupid. My mother always said I was both." The almost smile faded. He moved toward the door, and Mira thought the conversation was over. But he paused with his hand on the iron handle. "Sleep, translator. Tomorrow you work." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Mira stood in the renewed darkness, heart pounding. He hadn't hurt her, hadn't threatened her.
He'd listened.
And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. The guards came at dawn, or what Mira guessed was dawn. They hauled her out of the cell without explanation, half dragging her up stone staircases that seemed to go on forever. Her legs, stiff from the dungeon's cold, barely cooperated. They emerged into a corridor flooded with morning light. Mira squinted against the brightness, her eyes watering after 2 days of darkness. The guards didn't slow down. They pulled her through hallways lined with ancient tapestries and carved columns until they stopped before massive wooden doors. One guard knocked twice. "Enter," came a voice from within. The royal archives were nothing like Mira expected. Instead of the cold, formal chambers of the rest of the fortress, this room felt
alive.
Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, their spines cracked and worn with use. Scrolls overflowed from wooden tables. Maps covered in faded ink hung between the shelves. Dust motes danced in sunlight streaming through tall windows. And in the center of it all stood King Valerius. He traded his armor for simpler dark clothing, though he still looked every inch a predator. He was examining a scroll, his expression focused in a way that made him seem almost human. "Almost. Your Majesty," the guard bowed. "The prisoner, as requested." Valerius glanced up. His red eyes found Mira, and something flickered across his face. Calculation, maybe. Or curiosity. "Leave us." The guards hesitated. "My lord, protocol requires." "I'm aware of protocol." His voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Leave." They fled. Mira stood awkwardly near the door, very aware that she was filthy, exhausted, and alone with the most powerful vampire in the realm. Her earlier bravery felt like a distant memory. Valerius gestured to a table buried under ancient documents. "Come here." She approached slowly, scanning for threats. But he simply pointed to a thick book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. "This is the Treaty of Broken Chains," he said. "Signed 400 years ago between the vampire clans and the human kingdoms. It's written in Old Common, a language my scholars claim to read, but I suspect they're guessing at half of it." Mira stared at the book, then at him. "You want me to translate?" "I want you to translate accurately." He moved to the window, putting distance between them. "My court translators have a habit of adjusting meaning to suit their preferences. Or mine. And you think I won't? You've already proven you're willing to speak unwelcome truths." His tone was dry. "I'm testing whether you're also willing to speak welcome lies." Myra's breath caught. This wasn't just about translation. This was a test of character. And probably a trap. If she translated faithfully, and the treaty contained anything embarrassing to vampires, he'd know she could be trusted. But if she lied to make him look better? "What happens if you don't like what I find?" she asked quietly. Valerius turned from the window. Sunlight caught in his dark hair, and for a moment he looked less like a monster and more like what he actually was, an ancient being who'd seen centuries pass. "Then I'll finally have truth instead of flattery," he said. "Translate." Mira pulled out a chair and sat, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the treaty. The Old Common script was faded but legible. She'd studied it with the village priest, back when she thought learning dead languages might earn her work as a scribe. She began reading, translating aloud as she went. The treaty was fascinating. It outlined borders, trade agreements, and blood tribute limits, much smaller tributes than current law required. There were protections for human villages, restrictions on vampire hunting parties, and even clauses about shared governance in border territories. And then she reached Article 12. Her voice faltered. "Continue," Valerius said from across the room. "Article 12 states that vampires found guilty of murdering humans without cause will face the same punishment as humans who murder vampires." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Execution. Public execution." The room went very quiet. "And is that law currently enforced?" Valerius asked softly. "No, Your Majesty." Myra's voice was barely a whisper. "Vampires can't be tried for human deaths. It's been that way since before I was born." He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. "Keep reading." She continued through the treaty, finding more discrepancies. Promises that had been forgotten. Protections that had been stripped away. By the time she finished, a knot had formed in her stomach. "You knew," she said. You knew what was in here before you asked me to translate. I suspected. Valerius moved back to the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the ancient book. But I needed to know if you'd lie about it. If you'd soften the words to avoid angering me. And if I had, then you'd be useless to me. He studied her with those unsettling red eyes. Truth is worthless from people who deal in convenient fiction. Myra's hands clenched into fists. What do you want from me? That, Valerius said, is an excellent question. He called for the guards, and they returned her to the dungeon. But as Mira descended back into darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The Vampire King had tested her. And somehow, impossibly, she'd passed. Lady Sareth's chambers were decorated in shades of crimson and gold, colors meant to evoke power and wealth. Tonight, they hosted 12 of the court's most influential vampires, all gathered around a table laden with crystal glasses filled with blood. Human blood, of course. The expensive kind. This is madness, Lord Corvinus said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He was an ancient vampire, his face lined with scars from wars fought centuries ago. The king brings a human prisoner to the royal archives. Alone. Unsupervised. It's unprecedented. It's weakness, Lady Sareth corrected. She was beautiful in the way poisonous flowers were beautiful. Dark hair, sharp features, eyes like chips of amber. Valerius has always been ruthless. Efficient. Cold. Now suddenly he's playing teacher to some peasant girl? Duke Malroth, youngest of the group, but no less dangerous, leaned forward. My sources say he visited her cell. The first night she was imprisoned. Past midnight. A murmur rippled through the gathering. Visited her for what purpose? Asked Countess Vex, her voice deceptively sweet. That's what troubles me. Malroth's fingers drummed against the table. The guards were dismissed. No one knows what was said. She's bewitched him somehow, Sareth's eyes glittered. Use some human magic or trickery. It's the only explanation. Lord Corvinus shook his head. Valerius is centuries old. He's resisted actual witches, survived assassination attempts by blood mages. You think a translator from a border village has power we don't? Then what? Sareth's voice rose. He spares the human who humiliated him in open court. Imprisons, but doesn't execute her. Now he's having her translate state documents? What's the next step? Making her an advisor? The room fell silent. They all knew the real fear beneath the anger. Influence. If the king started listening to human perspectives, started questioning the laws that kept vampires firmly in control, everything could change. The comfortable hierarchy that had existed for generations would crumble. She needs to die, Sareth said flatly. Before this goes any further. We can't simply kill her. Countess Vex's voice was patient, as if explaining something to a child. Not after the king explicitly ordered her imprisoned. That would be direct defiance. An accident. Then Duke Malroth smiled, showing fangs. Dungeons are dangerous places. Prisoners die from disease, injury, despair. And if the king investigates? Corvinus challenged. He won't. Sareth stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the fortress courtyard. Because he'll understand it as a message. We're reminding him that humans are fragile, temporary creatures. Not worth his attention. You're assuming he'll accept her death. Corvinus's voice held a warning. If you're wrong, if he actually cares about this girl, you'll force him to choose between his court and a prisoner. He'll choose us, Sareth said confidently. He always does. Valerius knows where his power comes from. Not from human approval, but from vampire loyalty. Another noble spoke up, Baron Kresh, who'd been silent until now. And if he doesn't? If he punishes whoever harms her? Then we'll know for certain he's compromised. Sareth turned back to face them, her expression cold. And a compromised king is no king at all. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Treason. Rebellion. A new ruler. This is dangerous talk, Corvinus warned. We should wait. Observe. The king's interest might fade naturally. Or it might grow. Sareth moved back to the table, her voice dropping to something almost seductive. Every day she lives, she gains more influence. Today it's translating treaties. Tomorrow, she'll be standing at his side during councils, whispering in his ear, convincing him that humans deserve equality. That will never happen, someone muttered. Won't it? Saratha's smile was sharp. He's already questioning our reports. I heard from the archives master that Valerius spent 3 hours reading that ancient treaty. 3 hours learning about laws we abandoned decades ago. Laws that gave humans protections, rights, voices. She let that sink in. She's dangerous, Sarath continued. Not because she has power, but because she's making him remember a time when he believed humans mattered. When he thought ruling meant more than controlling. That kind of nostalgia can topple kingdoms. Duke Malroth nodded slowly. So, what do you propose? Nothing hasty. Nothing obvious. Saratha's eyes glittered with calculation. But we prepare. We watch. And the moment an opportunity presents itself. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Around the table, nobles exchanged glances. Some looked uncertain. Others looked hungry. They all looked dangerous. One more thing, Countess Vex said softly. If we move against the girl and fail, if the king discovers our involvement, we don't act as individuals. We act together. United. Agreed, Sarath said. All of us, or none of us. One by one, the nobles nodded. In her cell far below, Mira slept fitfully, unaware that her survival had stopped being the king's decision alone. It had become a battlefield. And the war for Valerius's court had already begun. Mira jerked awake when the cell door crashed open. This time it wasn't guards, it was Magistrate Kale, moving with urgent purpose. Get up. You're traveling with the king. Mira blinked, still half asleep. What? Now. Girl, Kale pulled her to her feet. There's no time. 10 minutes later, Mira found herself in a carriage rattling through the fortress gates. Across from her sat Valerius, silent and unreadable. 2 guards rode outside, their weapons gleaming in the early morning light. Mira clutched the seat as the carriage jolted over rough road. Where are we going? Ravenspire, Valerius said without looking at her. A human city in the Northern Territories, recently brought under full vampire control. Her stomach dropped. Why am I? You told me I don't see my people. That I rely on reports from lying governors. Now he did look at her, his red eyes sharp. So, show me. Show me what I'm missing. The journey took 4 hours. They passed through countryside that grew progressively bleaker, fields left fallow, abandoned farmhouses, orchards with trees stripped bare. Myra's chest tightened with each mile. This was worse than her village. Much worse. When Ravenspire came into view, she understood why it was called broken. The city walls were intact, but everything inside looked like a fresh wound. Buildings bore scorch marks from recent fires. Windows were shattered. The streets, visible even from a distance, were nearly empty despite the morning hour. Their carriage rolled through gates manned by vampire soldiers. The few humans visible pressed themselves against walls, heads down, as the royal escort passed. Valerius's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. He was watching everything. They stopped in the central square. Once, this must have been a marketplace. Mira could see the remains of vendor stalls, now smashed and scattered. A fountain stood dry in the center, its basin cracked. Governor Thane emerged from the administrative building, a squat vampire with an oily smile. Your Majesty, such an honor. If we'd known you were coming, we would have prepared proper. I prefer unannounced visits. Valerius stepped from the carriage. They're more illuminating. Thane's smile faltered. His eyes slid to Mira, confusion flickering across his face. And the human? Is with me. Valerius's tone killed any further questions. Show me the city. Thane led them through Ravenspire, and with every street they walked, Myra's horror grew. A makeshift hospital housed 30 humans too weak to work, victims of excessive blood tributes. The physician, a haggard woman with trembling hands, explained they had no medicine. Supply shipments hadn't arrived in 2 months. Shipments were delayed by bandits, Thane said smoothly. Mira bit her tongue. She'd seen the medical supplies in the governor's building, stacked in a storage room, gathering dust. They passed a bread line where humans waited for rations. An old man at the front received a piece of moldy bread barely larger than his palm. He took it without complaint, without even looking up. Standard rations, Thane explained. Quite generous, actually. A child darted past, thin as a skeleton, clutching something small. A soldier's hand shot out, grabbing the child by the neck and lifting him off the ground. Thief, the soldier snarled. This brat stole from the supply house. The child choked, legs kicking. In his hand was an apple, bruised and half-rotten. Mira moved, without thinking. Stop. The soldier turned, surprised. His grip didn't loosen. He's just hungry, Mira said, her voice shaking. Please. He's a child. He's vermin. The soldier looked to Thane. Punishment for theft is. Release him. Valerius's voice cut through the square like a blade. The soldier dropped the child immediately. The boy scrambled away, disappearing into an alley without his stolen apple. Thane cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, discipline is necessary to maintain. How often are children caught stealing? Valerius asked quietly. Daily, sire. Sometimes more. Because they're starving, Mira said before she could stop herself. Thane's face darkened. The human speaks out of turn, Your Majesty. Shall I? She speaks what everyone here is too afraid to say. Valerius turned in a slow circle, taking in the broken fountain, the empty shops, the humans who wouldn't meet his eyes. This city is dying. We've maintained order, Thane protested. Crime is down. Tax collection is at 90% efficiency. The reports clearly show. The reports show numbers. Valerius's voice was cold now, dangerously cold. They don't show this. He gestured to a family huddled against a wall, mother, father, 2 children, all rail-thin and hollow-eyed. They flinched when Valerius looked at them, as if his gaze alone might kill them. They're afraid, Mira whispered. Not just of punishment. They're afraid of existing. Valerius stared at the family for a long moment. Then he turned to Thane, and the governor actually took a step back. How much of the medical supplies have you sold? Thane's face went pale. Your Majesty, I would never. How much? The silence stretched. Finally, Thane's shoulders slumped. 40%. To wealthy families in the south. The profit goes to maintaining the garrison, I swear. You're relieved of duty. Valerius's words were final as a gravestone closing. Pack your belongings. You have until nightfall to leave this city. Thane opened his mouth to argue, saw the look in the king's eyes, and wisely stayed silent. As they walked back to the carriage, Mira felt Valerius's gaze on her. You were right, he said quietly. I didn't see them. But Mira wasn't thinking about being right. She was thinking about the child who'd dropped his apple, still hungry. One removed governor wouldn't fix that. They were halfway across the square when the first scream rang out. Mira turned just as chaos erupted. From alleyways and side streets, humans poured into the square. Dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't armed with much, just kitchen knives, farming tools, broken bottles. But their faces held something far more dangerous than weapons. Desperation. Death to vampires, someone roared. Take back our city. The vampire soldiers reacted instantly, drawing swords and moving to form a protective circle around Valerius. But the mob wasn't targeting the king. They were going after any vampire they could reach. A merchant vampire was dragged from his shop. 3 soldiers near the fountain disappeared under a wave of bodies. Blood, both red and darker, splattered across the broken cobblestones. Get the king to the carriage, a guard captain shouted. But more humans kept coming, flooding the square like a dam had broken. These weren't warriors. They were bakers and farmers and mothers and children. People who had nothing left to lose. Myra's blood ran cold. This wasn't a planned rebellion. This was suicide. Stop, she screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar. A young human man broke through the defensive line, charging straight at their group. His eyes were wild, fixed on Valerius with pure hatred. He raised a rusted sword above his head. And Valerius caught his wrist, without even seeming to try. For a moment, they were frozen. The man straining forward with all his strength, the king holding him effortlessly at bay. "Please," the man sobbed. "You took everything. My wife, my daughter, they died because we had nothing. Please just let me." Valerius twisted his wrist, and the sword clattered to the ground. But he didn't break the man's arm. Didn't kill him. "Stand down," Valerius said. The man collapsed to his knees, weeping. But the riot wasn't stopping. A vampire soldier lost his patience and drove his sword through a rioter's chest. That single death ignited something worse. More screams, more violence, more blood. "They're going to massacre each other," Mira breathed. She saw a woman with a baby strapped to her chest, holding a torch and advancing on soldiers. Saw a boy no older than 12 climbing onto a vampire's back with a knife. Saw old men and young mothers and everyone in between throwing themselves at certain death because death had already come for them slowly. "Your Majesty, we must evacuate," the guard captain urged. "No," Valerius's voice cut through the chaos. "Stand down. All soldiers stand down now." The vampire soldiers hesitated, confused. A few obeyed immediately, lowering weapons. Others didn't, still fighting off attackers. "I said stand down." Valerius's voice carried supernatural force, and every vampire in the square froze. The humans, confused by the sudden change, slowed their assault. The riot didn't stop completely. Momentum doesn't die that easily, but it stuttered, people looking around in bewilderment. Valerius stepped forward, away from his guards, putting himself in the open. "Your Majesty," the captain hissed. "It's not safe." But Valerius was already moving through the crowd. Humans scrambled back, not attacking but not fleeing either. They watched with a mix of terror and confusion as their king walked among them, unarmed, unguarded. Mira, acting on pure instinct, followed him. "Are you insane?" she whispered. "They'll kill us both. If they wanted me dead, I'd already be dead." His eyes scanned the crowd. "They want to be heard." He stopped in the center of the square and raised his voice. "Who leads you?" Silence. Then slowly, an older man stepped forward. His face was scarred, his hands weathered from years of labor. "No one leads us, vampire. We're just tired of dying." "You'll die faster this way," Valerius said. It wasn't a threat, just truth. "At least we'll die fighting," the old man's voice cracked. "At least we'll die like we still matter." Something passed across Valerius's face. Pain, maybe, or recognition. "You matter." A woman laughed bitterly. "Fine words. They won't feed our children." "No," Valerius agreed. "But actions will." He turned to the vampire soldiers. "Captain, open the medical supply stores. All of them. Distribute everything, food, medicine, blankets, to these people. Today. Now." The captain's jaw dropped. "Your Majesty, that's months of supplies." Did I stutter? "But the protocols, the inventory procedures." "Break them," Valerius's eyes blazed. "Or I'll find a captain who will." The captain bowed hastily and ran toward the administrative building, shouting orders. Valerius turned back to the crowd. "I've removed Governor Thane. His corruption ends today. I'll send administrators who will actually govern, not just extract." "And the blood tribute," he paused. "It's suspended. For 6 months. Until this city recovers." Stunned silence. "Why?" the old man asked, suspicion heavy in his voice. "Why now? Why care now?" Valerius glanced at Mira. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. "Because someone made me look," he said quietly. A bottle flew from the crowd, aimed directly at the king's head. Mira moved without thinking. She shoved Valerius aside, and the bottle shattered against her shoulder instead. Glass and liquid exploded. Pain bloomed, white-hot down her arm. She crumpled, gasping. Valerius caught her before she hit the ground. His face was inches from hers, red eyes wide with something that looked almost like fear. Get a physician, he snarled at his guards.
Now.
As darkness crept into the edges of her vision, Mira heard the old man's voice, shocked and wondering. She took a blow for him. A human took a blow for the vampire king. Then everything went black. Mira woke to silk sheets and sunlight. For a moment, she thought she'd died and somehow ended up somewhere pleasant. Then the pain in her shoulder reminded her she was very much alive. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her entire right side felt like it was on fire. Don't move. A physician appeared at her bedside, a vampire woman with silver-streaked hair and gentle hands. The glass cut deep. You'll tear the stitches. Where am I? The traveling palace. The physician checked her bandages with professional efficiency. The king insisted you be brought here rather than treated in Ravenspire's hospital. Myra's head spun. The traveling palace was reserved for royalty and high nobles. I shouldn't be. Take it up with His Majesty. The physician's lips quirked slightly. Though I don't recommend arguing with him. He's been in a mood. She left, and Mira lay back against pillows that probably cost more than her entire village. The room was elegant but not ostentatious. Dark wood furniture, heavy curtains, a fireplace crackling softly. Through the window, she could see Ravenspire in the distance. The door opened. Valerius entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He looked exactly the same as always, composed, controlled, dangerous. But something in his eyes was different.
Sharper.
You're awake. He moved to stand near the window, keeping distance between them. The physician says you'll heal completely. Good. Myra's throat was dry. How long was I unconscious? 6 hours. He turned to face her fully. Why did you do it? Do what? Push me aside. His voice was carefully neutral. You had no reason to protect me. You're my prisoner. I'm the reason you're in this situation at all. Mira thought about lying, making up some rational explanation. But they'd moved past lies. Instinct, she said simply. I saw the bottle coming and I just moved. Instinct, he repeated the word like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. You have remarkable instincts for self-destruction, says the vampire who walked unarmed into a rioting crowd. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. Then it vanished. I've assigned you permanent guards. For soldiers rotating shifts. They'll accompany you everywhere. Myra's stomach clenched. I don't need guards in a cell. You won't be returning to the dungeon. The words hung in the air. What? You'll remain in the palace. Guest quarters, not a cell. Valerius's tone was matter-of-fact. You'll continue translating documents. And he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. You'll advise me on human territories. Myra's mind reeled. Advise you? I'm not qualified to. You see what others don't. What I don't. His jaw tightened. Ravenspire shouldn't have reached that breaking point. My governors assured me the territories were stable. Either they lied, or they're incompetent. Either way, I need someone who'll tell me the truth. And you think that's me? You've proven it is. He moved closer, his expression intense. You could have said nothing in the council. You could have softened the treaty translations. You could have stayed silent in Ravenspire. Instead, you spoke. Every time, regardless of consequences. Speaking almost got me killed, Mira pointed out. Yes, Valerius's eyes held hers. And you did it anyway. That's exactly the kind of advisor I need. Myra's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. Yesterday, she was a prisoner. Now he wanted to make her an advisor? The court would lose their minds. They'll hate me, she said quietly. Your nobles already want me dead. This will make it worse. Let me worry about my court. Will you? The words came out sharper than intended. Because there's wanting me dead, and then there's actually trying to kill me. That riot, someone might try something similar here. Valerius's expression went cold. Dangerous. Then they'll learn what happens to people who harm what's mine. The possessiveness in those words should have terrified her. Instead, it sent a strange warmth through her chest. I'm not yours, she said softly. No, he looked away. But you're under my protection now. That makes you untouchable. He walked to the door, then paused. My soldiers will be stationed outside.
Rest.
Tomorrow, we return to the fortress. Your Majesty? Mira called before he could leave. Why are you really doing this? Valerius was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because for 300 years, I've ruled through fear and strength. I've built an empire on blood and iron. And it took a nobody translator from a border village to show me what I've actually built. He met her eyes. A kingdom of ghosts, waiting to die. He left before she could respond. Mira lay back against the silk pillows, her mind racing. The vampire king had just admitted weakness, had admitted failure, and somehow, impossibly, he decided she was the one who could help him fix it. Outside her door, she heard the guards take position, for soldiers assigned solely to keep her alive. The prisoner had become the protected, and Mira had no idea if that made her safer or put an even bigger target on her back. 3 days after returning to the fortress, Mira was still adjusting to her new reality. The guest quarters were luxurious and suffocating in equal measure. She had space, comfort, and 4 guards who followed her everywhere. She'd traded a dungeon cell for a gilded cage. The court's reaction had been exactly what she'd feared. Nobles whispered when she passed. Servants averted their eyes. During the one council session she'd attended, standing awkwardly at Valerius's side while he discussed border security, the silence had been thick enough to choke on. Lady Sereth had stared at her with such open hatred that Myra's guards had unconsciously moved closer. Now, late afternoon sunlight streamed through her window as she worked through another stack of documents. Treaties, reports, census records. Valerius wanted her perspective on all of it. Her hand cramped from hours of writing notes in the margins. A knock at the door made her look up. "Enter," she called. A servant girl entered, carrying a silver tray with a teapot and cup. She was young, maybe 16, with nervous eyes and shaking hands. "His Majesty thought you might want refreshment, miss," the girl said, setting the tray on Myra's desk. Mira smiled, trying to put her at ease. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Ilara, miss," the girl bobbed a curtsy. "You don't need to call me miss, Ilara. I'm just a translator." "That's not what people are saying me." Ilara caught herself. "They're saying you're the king's advisor now, that he listens to you." "People say a lot of things." Mira reached for the teacup. "Most of them aren't true." The tea smelled of chamomile and honey. She raised it to her lips.
And stopped.
Something was wrong. The smell was right, but underneath it, something else. Bitter. Chemical. Myra's eyes snapped to Ilara. The girl had gone pale, backing toward the door. "Ilara?" Mira set the cup down carefully. "What's in this tea?" I don't." Tears spilled down the girl's cheeks. "Please, I didn't want to. They said they'd kill my family. My little brother, he's only 8, and they said." The door burst open. Myra's guards rushed in, swords drawn. "Step away from the prisoner," the lead guard barked at Ilara. "She's not the threat," Mira said quickly, positioning herself between the terrified girl and the guards. "Someone forced her to do this."
Who?
The guard's voice was sharp. "Who gave you the poison?" Ilara sobbed. "I don't know. A noble, I think. She wore a veil. She found me in the kitchens and said if I didn't bring the tea, my family would." "Sereth." One of the guards growled. "Has to be." Another guard was already running for the door. "I'll inform His Majesty." Myra's stomach dropped. "Wait." But he was gone. 10 minutes later, the fortress shook with Valerius's rage. Mira heard him before she saw him, his voice echoing through the corridors, cold and lethal. When he appeared in her doorway, his eyes blazed with something that made even his own guards flinch. "Where is she?" His voice could have frozen fire. "Where is the servant?" "She's innocent," Mira said immediately, stepping in front of Ilara again. The girl had collapsed into a chair, still crying. She was coerced. Threatened. "She brought poison into your room. Under duress." Valerius's gaze finally left Ilara and locked onto Mira. "You're defending someone who tried to kill you." "I'm defending someone who's a victim," Myra's voice shook but held firm. If you want justice, find whoever threatened her family. They're the guilty 1 inch. For a moment, Valerius looked like he might argue. Then, incredibly, some of the fury drained from his expression. Captain, he said without looking away from Myra, take the servant into protective custody. Find her family. Bring them to the fortress. They'll be safe here. Yes, Your Majesty. After Alara was led away, gently, thank the stars, Valerius turned his full attention to Myra. Show me the tea. She pointed to the cup, still sitting on her desk. He examined it without touching, then his expression darkened further. Nightshade. Enough to kill a human in minutes, his hands clenched into fists. If you drunk it. But I didn't. You almost did. I saw you lift the cup. I smelled something off, Myra tried to keep her voice steady. I stopped in time. Valerius was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. I know who did this. Sereth. Her or someone acting on her behalf. The court nobles who think you're a threat. He moved to the window, staring out at the fortress courtyard below. They won't stop. Not unless I make an example. Myra's breath caught. What kind of example? The permanent kind. You can't execute people without proof. Can't I? He turned back to face her, and the look in his eyes was ancient, terrible. I'm the king, Myra. I can do whatever I want. And right now, I want to make it very clear what happens to people who try to harm you. By becoming the monster they already think you are? The words came out before she could stop them. The room went deathly quiet. Valerius stared at her. What did you say? Myra forced herself to keep talking. You're trying to change things. To rule differently. But if you execute nobles without trial, without evidence, you're just proving them right. You're the tyrant they fear. Then what would you have me do? His voice was soft, dangerous. Someone tried to poison you. They'll try again. Then find actual proof. Have a real trial. Show the court that even nobles answer to justice. She took a step toward him. Show them that you're better than they think you are. Valerius looked at her for a long time. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, a cold, predatory expression. Very well. A trial. With evidence, his eyes glittered. But make no mistake, Myra. When I find proof of who ordered this, and I will find it, they'll wish I'd simply executed them quickly. He strode to the door, then paused. Double the guards. No one enters these rooms without my explicit permission. And Myra? He glanced back. No more defending people who try to kill you. I won't be merciful twice. After he left, Myra sank into her chair, trembling. Someone had tried to poison her. And the Vampire King's response wasn't to send her away to safety. It was to declare war on anyone who'd dare try again. The trial took 2 days. Valerius's investigators worked with ruthless efficiency. They found the poison dealer who'd sold Nightshade to a veiled noblewoman. They traced payments through 3 intermediaries. They discovered 4 other servants who'd been approached with similar threats. The evidence led exactly where everyone expected, Lady Sereth. She stood in the Grand Council Hall now, defiant even in chains. Around her, the court watched in tense silence as Valerius read the charges. Attempted murder of a person under royal protection. Coercion of servants. Conspiracy against the crown. His voice was flat, emotionless. How do you plead? I did what was necessary, Sereth's chin lifted. That human has bewitched you, Your Majesty. She's turned you against your own people. Someone had to act. My own people. Valerius descended from his throne slowly. You mean vampires? Of course I mean vampires. Sereth's composure cracked. We've ruled for centuries because we're stronger, smarter, superior. Now you're letting a human advise you? Making decisions based on her whispers? It's weakness. Is it? Valerius stopped in front of her. Tell me, Sereth, in the 300 years I've ruled, have I ever seemed weak to you? She hesitated. No, Your Majesty. Have I ever failed to crush rebellion? Failed to win a war? Failed to maintain order? No, but Then perhaps you should consider that my choices come from strength, not weakness. His voice dropped to something deadly. And perhaps you should remember that I don't explain myself to traitors.
He gestured to the guards.
Take her to the execution grounds. Saratha's face went white. Your Majesty, please. I only wanted to protect. You wanted to protect your own power. Valerius turned away. Guards. They dragged her toward the doors. Her screams echoed through the hall until they faded into distance. The court remained frozen. No one spoke. No one moved. Mira, standing in her assigned place near the throne, felt sick. Justice, yes, but execution still felt like failure. Valerius dismissed the court with a wave. Nobles filed out in uncomfortable silence, throwing glances at Mira that ranged from fear to resentment to something like grudging respect. When the hall was empty except for guards, Valerius finally spoke. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. They climbed to the highest balcony of the fortress, a windswept platform that overlooked the entire kingdom. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Valerius stood at the edge, hands clasped behind his back. For a long time he said nothing. Mira waited, the silence stretching between them. Do you know why I really spared you? He finally asked. That first day in the council hall? No, Mira admitted quietly. Because you looked at me like I was capable of being something other than a monster. He didn't turn around. Not with hope, exactly. You were terrified. But underneath the fear, there was expectation. Like you'd already decided I could choose to be better, and were just waiting to see if I would. Myra's breath caught. I didn't think that consciously. Maybe not. But it was there. Now he did turn, and the dawn light caught in his eyes, making them seem less red and more human. Do you know how long it's been since anyone looked at me that way? How long? 273 years, his voice was soft. Since my wife died. Mira stared. She'd never heard anyone mention that the vampire king had been married. She was human, Valerius continued. A scholar. Brilliant. Infuriating. She argued with me constantly. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Especially about how I ruled. She believed that power meant protection, not domination. That fear was a tool to be used sparingly, not a foundation to build on. What happened to her? Old age. The words were heavy with centuries of grief. I watched her grow old while I stayed the same. Watched her die knowing I would continue without her, forever. And after she was gone, I told myself her ideals died with her. That I'd been foolish to listen. That ruling through strength alone was the only way. He moved closer to Mira, his expression raw in a way she'd never seen. And then you stood in my council hall and called my laws cruel. You spoke exactly the kind of truth she would have spoken. And I realized he paused. I realized I'd spent nearly 3 centuries proving her wrong because I was angry that she left me. Myra's throat tightened. I'm not her.
No.
You're not. Valerius's eyes held hers. You're angrier. More reckless. You defend servants who try to poison you and push kings out of the way of flying bottles. My wife was wise. You're stupid. Brave, the word came out rough. Stupidly, impossibly brave. And you reminded me that fear isn't strength. It's just fear wearing a crown. Dawn light spilled across the balcony, painting everything gold. Somewhere below, the fortress was waking, servants and soldiers and nobles beginning another day. But up here, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the 2 of them. I don't know how to help you rule, Mira said honestly. I'm not a scholar or a strategist. I'm just someone who tells the truth. Valerius reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek where a fading bruise from the bottle still lingered. That's more valuable than you know. His touch was cool but gentle. Myra's heart hammered against her ribs. Your court still hates me, she whispered. Let them. They'll try again. I know. His hand dropped. That's why you can leave. Mira blinked. What?
Leave.
Today if you want. I'll give you safe passage anywhere in the kingdom, Gold enough to start over, protection until you're settled. His expression was carefully neutral. You've done more than anyone could ask. You don't owe me anything more. For a moment, Mira imagined it. Leaving this fortress, this danger, this impossible situation. Returning to quiet anonymity. Safety. Then she thought about Ravenspire. About Alara and her 8-year-old brother. About the old man in the riot who said they just wanted to matter. About a king who'd forgotten how to be anything but feared and might, just might, be willing to remember. No, she said. Valerius's eyes widened slightly. No. I'm not leaving. Mira straightened her shoulders. Not until we fix this. Together. Valerius stared at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. You realize what you're choosing, he said slowly. More assassination attempts. More hatred from the court. Every day will be a risk. I know. You could die here. I could die anywhere. Mira met his gaze steadily. At least here, my death might actually mean something. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, respect, and something deeper that made her breath catch. You're certain? No, she admitted.
I'm terrified.
But I'm certain that leaving would be worse. Valerius was silent for a long moment, the dawn wind pulling at his dark hair. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile, not the cold, predatory expression she'd seen before. My wife would have liked you, he said quietly. Before Mira could respond, footsteps echoed on the stairs leading to the balcony. A guard appeared, bowing quickly. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. Duke Malroth requests urgent audience. He says it's about the southern border. The warmth in Valerius's expression vanished, replaced by the mask of the king. I'll be there shortly. After the guard left, Valerius turned back to Mira. If you're staying, there's something you need to understand. This won't be easy. The court will test you. They'll look for any weakness, any excuse to remove you. I know. And he hesitated, a rare show of uncertainty. I won't always protect you the way you want. Sometimes I'll have to let you face their challenges alone. If I shield you from everything, they'll never accept that you've earned your place. Myra's stomach tightened, but she nodded. I understand. Do you? His eyes searched hers. Because earning their respect means surviving their contempt first. It means standing in council halls where everyone wants you gone. It means making decisions that might get people killed. Like Sereth, he didn't look away. Her execution was necessary. But there will be more. Harder choices. And you'll have to live with being part of them. Mira thought about the terror in Sereth's eyes as the guards dragged her away. About justice and vengeance, and the blurry line between them. I can live with hard choices, she said quietly. What I can't live with is doing nothing while people suffer. Valerius studied her for another long moment. Then he did something that shocked her. He offered his hand. Not as a king to a subject. As an equal. Then we do this together, he said. Partners. You'll advise me honestly, even when I don't want to hear it. I'll give you authority to act, even when it makes my court uncomfortable. And we'll try to build something better than what came before. Mira looked at his outstretched hand. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a nobody translator dragged from her village. Now the vampire king was offering her partnership in reshaping a kingdom. It was insane.
Impossible. Terrifying.
She took his hand. His grip was firm, cool, and surprisingly gentle. For a heartbeat, they stood there in the dawn light, two people from completely different worlds making a promise neither fully understood yet. There's one more thing, Valerius said, not releasing her hand. I'm sending you away. Myra's heart plummeted.
What?
But you just said. Not as exile. As a test, he finally let go, stepping back. The border territories need inspection, real inspection, not the lies my governors send. I want you to go. See the conditions firsthand. Talk to people. Come back with the truth. Alone. With an escort. 20 soldiers, 2 magistrates, and enough authority to make immediate changes if needed. His expression was serious. You'll speak with my voice in those territories. What you decide, I'll enforce. The weight of that responsibility nearly knocked Mira over. I don't know enough to. You know what matters. You know what people need. Valerius moved to the balcony edge, looking out over the kingdom. My nobles have spent centuries studying law and strategy and politics. And in all that time, none of them noticed that humans were starving. You noticed in 5 minutes. Because I'm human. Because you see people, not resources, he glanced back at her. That's exactly what I need. What the kingdom needs. Myra's mind world.
Authority.
Real authority to change things. To help villages like hers, cities like Ravenspire. When do I leave? 3 days. That gives you time to prepare, to learn what questions to ask, he paused. And to say goodbye to the fortress. Just in case. The unspoken hung between them. In case you don't come back. I'll come back, Mira said with more confidence than she felt. I know, Valerius's voice was soft. Because you're too stubborn to do otherwise. Over the next 3 days, the fortress buzzed with confused speculation. The human advisor was being sent to the territories with royal authority. The court didn't know whether to be relieved she was leaving or terrified of what she might do with that power. Mira spent the time in frantic preparation. Magistrate Kale helped her understand border law. Captain Brennan, the same human envoy from that first council, arrived to brief her on territorial politics. Valerius himself taught her the symbols of royal authority and exactly how far her power extended. You can override governors, he explained, showing her the royal seal she'd carry. You can redistribute resources, suspend laws temporarily, and call for military support. But you can't declare war or sign treaties. Those remain with me. What if I make a mistake? Then we fix it together, he pressed the seal into her hand. Trust yourself, Mira.
Ido.
On the morning of departure, the entire fortress seemed to be watching. Nobles lined the corridors as Mira walked to the courtyard. Some looked hostile. Others looked curious. A few, very few, looked almost hopeful. Valerius waited by the carriage, surrounded by guards and officials. This was a formal departure, witnessed by the court. Every word would be remembered. Advisor Mira, he said formally. You carry the crown's authority to the border territories. Serve justly. Report honestly. Return safely. Yes, Your Majesty. She started to bow, but he caught her hand. The gesture was subtle, quick, but everyone saw it. Come back, he said quietly, too low for others to hear. Please. The vulnerability in those 2 words nearly undid her. I will, she promised. Then she climbed into the carriage, and the horses pulled away. As the fortress shrank behind her, Mira touched the royal seal in her pocket. She was no longer a prisoner. No longer just a translator. She was the king's advisor, carrying his authority into territories that desperately needed change. And for the first time since this impossible journey began, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could actually help. 6 weeks in the border territories changed everything. Mira returned to the fortress on a gray autumn morning, her carriage loaded with reports, testimonies, and evidence that would make the court very uncomfortable. She'd traveled to 12 territories, exposed 5 corrupt governors, redistributed enough hoarded supplies to feed 3 cities through winter, and gained something she hadn't expected, a reputation. The human advisor who spoke with the king's voice. The one who couldn't be bribed or intimidated. The one who actually listened. As her carriage rolled through the fortress gates, Mira felt the weight of exhaustion in her bones. 6 weeks of constant travel, endless meetings, and sleeping with one eye open had worn her down. But underneath the tiredness was something else. Purpose. The fortress courtyard was unusually crowded. News of her return had spread fast. Nobles clustered in small groups, watching as she emerged from the carriage. Servants paused in their work. Even the guards seemed more alert than usual. And standing at the top of the marble steps, waiting, was Valerius. He looked exactly the same, dark, imposing, unreadable. But when their eyes met, something in his expression softened. Your Majesty, Mira climbed the steps, aware of dozens of eyes tracking her movement. I've returned as ordered. So, I see. His voice was formal, but there was warmth beneath it. You'll report to the council immediately. They're eager to hear your findings. Of course they were. Half the court probably hoped she'd failed spectacularly. The council chamber was packed. Every noble who could claim a right to attend had shown up. Mira recognized faces from her first day: Lord Corvinus, Countess Vex, Duke Malroth, all watching her with varying degrees of hostility and curiosity. Valerius took his throne. Advisor Mira will now present her report on the border territories. Mira stepped forward, pulling out the thick folder of documents she compiled. Her hands didn't shake. 6 weeks of facing down corrupt governors and angry mobs had cured her of that particular fear. I visited 12 territories, she began, her voice clear and steady. In 11 of them, I found evidence of systemic corruption, resource hoarding, and abuse of authority. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Governor Thane's replacement in Ravenspire has implemented the medical distribution program. Mortality rates have dropped by 30%. Civil unrest has ceased entirely. She pulled out a document. The people are cooperative because they're no longer starving. One territory, Duke Malroth interrupted. You said 11 had corruption. What about the 12th? Governor Ashton in Millbrook runs his territory by the book. Fair tribute collection, transparent accounting, and he actually lives among the humans he governs. His territory is stable, prosperous, and has had 0 rebellions in 5 years. Mira met Malroth's eyes. I'm recommending him as the model for how all territories should be administered. A model based on one territory? Countess Vex's voice stripped skepticism. Hardly scientific. Then let's discuss the science. Mira pulled out more documents. I compiled data from all 12 territories: population, resource distribution, rebellion frequency, productivity. The pattern is clear. Territories with fair governance are more productive, more stable, and generate more revenue for the crown than territories ruled through fear alone. She laid the papers on the table in front of Valerius. Fear works short-term, but justice works forever. The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Corvinus stood slowly. You're suggesting we completely restructure how we govern humans, based on 6 weeks of observation. I'm suggesting we stop pretending that cruelty equals strength. Myra's voice didn't waver. The current system is failing. Ravenspire proved that. If we don't change how we rule, we'll face more riots, more rebellions, more bloodshed. And we should listen to a human about how to control humans? Malroth's smile was sharp. How convenient for you. Yes, Valerius said quietly. You should. Every head turned toward the throne. Valerius stood, moving down to stand beside Mira. The symbolism wasn't subtle. The king, standing with his human advisor as an equal. I've read every report advisor Mira sent during her travels, he continued. Every recommendation is supported by evidence. Every conclusion is logical. And more importantly, he looked at the assembled nobles. She's right, Your Majesty, Lord Corvinus began. I said she's right. Valerius's voice carried absolute authority. We've ruled through fear for centuries. We've called it strength. But strength that requires constant violence isn't strength, it's fragility. One riot in Ravenspire nearly cost us an entire city. How many more cities will we lose before we admit the system is broken? He picked up Myra's reports. These recommendations will be implemented immediately. Governors will be held to new standards. Territories will be audited regularly by advisors I trust, starting with Mira. And any noble who objects can take it up with me personally. The threat in those words was unmistakable. Duke Malroth stood. For a moment, Mira thought he'd challenge Valerius directly. Then, surprisingly, he bowed. If the king believes this is the path forward, I will support it, he said carefully. But I request permission to accompany the next territory inspection, to see these results firsthand. Valerius's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. Granted. One by one, other nobles offered similar support. Some genuine, others clearly strategic. But the tide had turned. Open opposition would be treason, and no one wanted to follow Sareth's path. The council was dismissed. As nobles filed out, several approached Mira, offering congratulations, asking questions, or simply acknowledging her presence. She was no longer just the human girl. She was Advisor Mira, the king's voice in the territories. Someone who mattered. When the chamber finally emptied, only Valerius remained. "You didn't have to stand beside me," Mira said quietly. "That made it clear you're backing me completely." That was the point. He studied her with those ancient red eyes. "You came back with proof, with solutions, with everything I asked for, and more. You've earned that backing. They still don't trust me. They don't have to trust you. They have to respect you." He moved closer. "And now they do. Because you've proven you're not just some human I'm indulging. You're someone who gets results." Mira felt something warm bloom in her chest. "We make a good team." Yes, Valerius's expression softened. "We do." Outside the windows, the sun was setting over the kingdom, over territories that might, finally, start healing. Over a fortress where a human stood in rooms she shouldn't, spoke words that shouldn't be allowed, and changed things that shouldn't be changeable. "What now?" Mira asked. Valerius smiled. That real smile that made him look less like a monster and more like a man who'd been alone for too long.
Now.
He gestured to the stacks of documents waiting on his desk. "Now we keep working. Together." Mira looked at the work ahead. The territories still needing reform, the nobles still needing convincing, the kingdom still needing healing. It was overwhelming.
Impossible.
But she'd survived assassination attempts, riots, and 6 weeks of border politics. She could handle this too. Together, she agreed. And standing in the council hall where she'd once expected to die, where she'd offended the most dangerous vampire king, and everyone had thought she was doomed, Mira realized she'd found something more valuable than safety. She'd found purpose.
Partnership.
And maybe, just maybe, something that looked almost like hope. The prisoner who spoke back had become the advisor who couldn't be silenced. And the king who'd ruled through fear was learning, one difficult day at a time, how to rule through something better.
The end.